right, I believe that we're live. Welcome to our panel. This is the intersection of AI and industrial control systems, cybersecurity best practices. It's a lot of words. I'm going to go around the I guess room, but really Zoom panel for our introductions. But my name is Michael Hudak. I run Fortify Your Data, which is a cybersecurity publication, mostly podcast newsletter these days, but very interested to introduce the rest. We're going to start with Eric. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Eric Byers. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Adolis Technology. We basically use a lot of AI and machine learning for software supply chain management issues, creations, SBOMs, cool things like that for both suppliers out there and the end users.
Fantastic. Danielle?
Yeah, my name is Danielle Jablansky. I'm a senior research analyst with Guidehouse Insights. I focus on OT cybersecurity, so intrusion detection systems, smart cities, things like that. I'm excited to be here, and thank you to the organizers and the sponsors.
Awesome. Ellen?
Hi, everyone. Ellen Boehm, and I'm the VP of IoT Strategy and Operations at Keyfactor. Keyfactor is a public key infrastructure and certificate lifecycle automation company. So we help customers with the infrastructure and then the certificate-based authentication that they need to secure systems. Thank you.
Thank you. And Zach?
Hi, my name is Zach Trias, and I'm the Director of Cybersecurity in Schneider Electric. I focus on building secure by design products and providing solutions to our customers so they can run their operations securely and productively. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Well, let's get this kicked off with a question for Eric. People often associate AI and cybersecurity with network anomaly detection tools. Are there other use cases for AI and machine learning in OT cybersecurity?
Oh, absolutely. That is just one use case of many. You can use AI, you can use machine learning anywhere a smart analyst is having to do a lot of sort of manual labor. So for example, one of the things we use AI for is for vulnerability detection. And when I say vulnerability detection, it's not out scanning the network. It's one of the ways you find vulnerabilities is reading PDFs. Just going to the National Vulnerability Database, especially in the OT space, will generally, at least half of the vulnerabilities are not even in there. So what do humans have to do? They have to go read PDFs from vendors. That's really inefficient. So you can use AI for even just doing things like consuming PDFs on vulnerabilities and then putting them into a database and managing them. So that's one of many, many, many use cases that we see for just making what are mundane or repeatable tasks that an analyst has to do much, much more efficient.
Yeah, and Danielle, when we talk about AI, I think the conversation comes up frequently of how do organizations begin to determine what should and should not be automated? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, every vendor that offers AI is going to say that they focus on the business need, the customer, and the use case that's specific to that end user. But what I would say to the end user is your data digital and interoperable? And then on the security side, I would always kind of be an advocate for automating asset inventory and network monitoring, not as a solution, but as a know your environment first and foremost kind of procedure to know, what devices are coming online, why, who are they talking to, and adopting IoT and AI and things like that. But the thing that Eric and I joke about is, you need to know how to ask the right questions about AI and ML applications and not pay for an AI price tag that's really just fancy statistics. So we can definitely get back into that as well. But, looking for that value add that maybe combines data from many business streams within your organization that also kind of adds value across the business, maybe it adds data to modeling and simulation that you might not have had before. But conversely, if there's something mundane that can be automated and saves time and money for your organization, but the vendor is actually offering all this data analytics and a subscription model on top of it and you don't need it, then you need to be able to know that you don't need it. So you have to ask the right questions.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off of that, you mentioned cost. Eric, a lot of people, I think, would consider AI to be an expensive venture. How do you see companies justifying the cost of an AI solution, especially as it pertains to cybersecurity?
Well, I think they're looking at it in the wrong way if they have to justify the cost. Or maybe the problem is that AI is a tool like anything else. If you're a carpenter and you've got a hammer and somebody's offering you an automated nail gun, you look at the cost of the automated nail gun and see how many nails you're driving. You know, does this save you money? That's what AI has to do. It has to save you money. It has to be more efficient. If you're you know, in the example I gave a second ago, if you're reading 5 PDFs a month, forget it. AI is not for you. If you've got a tiny little network with 12 assets, forget it. AI is not for you. It's not your, you know, it has to be a tool that benefits you. That's how you justify the cost. Oh, hey,
I
Mike.
apologize. I muted myself. That makes a lot of sense. But I think another thing that might be helpful is how do you define AI in this perspective?
How do I define it?
Yeah.
Is this a question for me? Okay. So, you know, for me, AI is any automated learning technique, anything that can be using, and there's the whole question of AI versus data science versus machine learning. But to me, AI is sort of a nice, handy buzzword for anything that is using automated math-based techniques to help people correlate, and make intelligence decisions about their data sets. Probably other people have better descriptions, but that's sort of my running one.
Yeah, well, I do find with AI, and especially when you start branching out to like machine learning and whatnot, everyone's definitions get a little bit different based on how they use it. But moving over to Zach, are there any guidelines for determining what might be a good application for AI or machine learning in an OT setting?
Yeah, I think if we maybe to add a little bit what Eric said on the definition of AI been around like since the 50s, from the time when Alan Turing created the Turing machine, and the algorithms are maybe also can be considered as part of AI because they are solving a problem that humans we cannot solve, and then or let's say we can solve it in a long time. Now, with the emergence of technologies like machine or techniques like machine learning, deep learning, and all, so we are getting more benefits from processing that large amount of data. So if you take AI and you say, okay, it's a black box, you give it a large amount of data, then you get a value or insights out of that. So as a guideline for people who are trying to get AI on how to use AI in their OT space, we should look to, okay, what problem are we trying to solve in the OT space? Or what value are we trying to get faster in the OT space? Does that area has a high amount or an amount of data that's linked to it? And then take AI and see what are the benefits of AI today or values that come with AI, and then do a mapping, right? And usually when we think about OT, we think only about the operation state of a system or a facility, but there is an entire life cycle behind. So when we talk about AI, it's not only used during the operations to increase efficiency, for example, to determine when your pump is going to get down, so you can go replace it before the plant goes down, but also AI can be used during the entire life cycle from the design of that OT system until its operation and maintenance. So also people, all the chain, all the actors participating in this chain, and I know Eric talked about the S-bomb or the software bomb, so that's maybe an analogy to that. All the people in this chain need to try to how to unlock the AI value in their operations. So this way you will have a higher value in the OT.
Absolutely. And going over to Alan, what changes in the regulatory landscape should device manufacturers be aware of, especially as it pertains to AI, but not only?
Yeah, I think this has been interesting to watch, right? So I think across multiple industries, you know, we've seen bad actors trying to exploit our infrastructure, whether that's power, water, transport, even, you know, other sort of healthcare, medical type systems. And I think the thing that we need to do, and it's not just a standard or a regulation saying that we have to be better. That's one way that's, I think, driving change. But we have to have a more proactive approach to an underlying security infrastructure that can prevent these attacks from happening. And I think using AI to give us visibility into that and to provide more of an integrated view into weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and things that can happen is a really good way to then be more preventative in our approach, and then allow us to put certain practices, policies, procedures in place that helps to protect this. So yes, I do see different regulations coming up. There's cybersecurity pieces, obviously, in the Cybersecurity Act. There's different policies coming out of FDA, for example, or the automotive industry. So I think being aware of those regulations is very important, because there's themes that are starting to emerge around how we can start to secure some underlying pieces once we have visibility and we know how things are trying to be attacked.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that perspective. Just go a little bit off script. I know we had a couple Q&A questions and wanted to answer one of those. And this is going to be for whoever wants to jump in. Could be more than one, but can small companies benefit from AI if their respective vendors provide distributed threat databases?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah.
That's a pretty, I'll just do a really quick one. That's a pretty open question, and I'm not sure how to answer it. Just to stop the dead silence, I'll do my best. And certainly if you've got suppliers providing you with open databases with a lot of data, then yeah, you probably could, and you have the resources to start looking at AI. That said, it's probably more efficient of the suppliers, front-ended. I mean, why have every small vendor or every small user running their own AI? This seems to be more of an add-on service that the providers of the database could be offering.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, that sounds like a job for a managed service approach and not for the end user if you are a small group, especially distilling a lot of threat intelligence, right? I mean, you can't make a lot of sense of it. And I think that's actually a big problem within each specific vertical across ICS is we don't do a good enough job, we as in cybersecurity folks, but also the vendors, to say exactly what matters in terms of vulnerabilities that might impact your operation in your neck of the woods, given your specific technology that you have at playing. So.
And if I want to add something from a high level perspective, if you look to AI today, it's also available to the bad guys, right? And we know that the bad guys are working with each other. They collaborate to do whatever bad they are doing today. And on the other hand, the good guys they need. So in order for us to be prepared or to proactively defend against the bad guys, we need to collaborate together as an industry to make sure that we are well prepared. So when it comes to AI, because it's data, let's say, based, right? It's enabled by the data. So it makes a lot of sense to collaborate at that space. And maybe that needs to be governed under any maybe consortiums or alliances or something like this. But the need is definitely there.
Yeah, and I'll riff off of something Ellen was talking about, which is the regulations. We're seeing a lot of regulations like the executive order coming down, or mandates, if you want to call it that. It's not really a regulation, that are really saying, hey, industry, up and down the supply chain, you've got to start talking. You've got to start communicating. And so all the regulations around software bill of materials. But that's only the beginning, because we have a really interesting problem in our space, known as the namespace problem. Everybody calls something, a piece of software or a company something different. So, hey, is that MS Word, Microsoft Word, every single package, and it's worse in OT. Yeah, whatever you call it, has a different namespace. And that's the type of thing that we're going to end up seeing a lot of AI, ML type techniques to try and correlate that information, whether it's coming from, a really top tier supplier like Zach's company, but how do they communicate to their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers, and how do they communicate to their customers in a way that everybody can basically understand we're talking about the same thing or not.
Yeah, well put, for sure. I'm going to skip back to the script a little bit, and I see some more Q&A coming in, but then we'll jump back to that. But Zach, I want to ask you, what are the most crucial things to consider when you're building secure by design products?
So I think we would start with what is a secure by design product, right? A secure by design product is a product that's there when it's operating, it's prepared to defend or have the capabilities to protect itself or the environment it's operating in from the threats. So first of all, you need to know your context. Where is your product operating? And you need to understand the threat landscape for that context. Then when you have this knowledge, and when we say threat landscape, what's the risk behind, what's the impact if your product is under attack or is failing in that space. Now you have this knowledge and you take it to the beginning. Where is your product design or implementation starts? So you start by the requirements. What are your security requirements? Features, non-functional requirements when it comes, for example, to robustness and all, or even to the integrity of operations. So you take these requirements, which are usually driven by the regulations, and this is where we can benefit from the regulations, because these guys who are writing the regulations are solving the problem for you or making it easier to take it from the risk to what you should do to defend against that risk. You put the requirement, you start implementing, you design your product, you need to do a threat analysis or a threat modeling of your product. You need to do, before implementing a single line of code, you need to think the hacker's way. What if this was done or hacked, or what if this was misused, right? Then when you solve, it's a feedback loop. So when you solve that problem and now you have a certain assertion that your product is designed to protect against the threats in its context, you go to the implementation and you do all the security testing to make sure that you are prepared for that landscape. And of course, the last one, you need to make sure that your communication is clear to whoever is using your product. You need to explain to them how to put this product in a way that it will operate securely. So from this view, you will see that security is not one person's responsibility. It's not the CISO's responsibility only. It's everyone's responsibility in the organization. And that will lead us, you need to have a program, an end-to-end program to tackle cybersecurity.
Great. And moving over to Danielle, how would we build dynamic security maturity throughout ICS industries rather than just one-at-a-time purchases, audits, or box checking?
Yes, we started to talk a little bit about costs, and we have to just accept the fact that there will be sunken costs in security. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that actually will reduce your residual risk that I don't think gets enough attention. But the key word to your question is really dynamic. It's not something you do one time or even once a year. And back to your first question, you should automate what makes sense for your team to optimize the resources that you have on hand and save time for the folks working on security to focus on anomalies or safety. But the focus should also really be on real world outcomes. And this is something I stress through and through my work. What security aspects are you actually achieving through compliance mechanisms? Are you actually creating a safer, more secure world in the real world, rather than just kind of the mechanisms to be compliant and not receive a fine? So maybe you're compliant by keeping up a license that's up to date and you're kind of renewing that on an annual basis, but the tool hasn't been tuned in your environment so that the analysts have been trained to actually ignore it, right? So that becomes kind of a built-in flaw rather than a feature. And I think that situation doesn't make you any more secure. It doesn't reduce any risk in your environment. And so there's kind of a trade-off between where you're spending that time and resource to be compliant, where you're not actually any more secure. So the last thing I would add to that is if you don't have a policy, then there's no tools that are going to save you. And I think compliance is just another tool in the tool belt, right? Even though it's not a security stack or a solution, it is a tool. And if you don't have an actual, coherent policy, then that tool is a little bit, I don't want to say not useless, but it's a little bit less useful.
Yeah, especially if you have a policy, but nobody follows it. So,
Right. Or it's 20 years old and it lives in an Excel spread and you don't know the password. So,
Yeah, or the policies and helping really change your risk profile. I mean, one of the things that drives, I'm sorry, jumping in on you here, but one of the things that drives me nuts is sort of like patching for patching's sake. And I've seen more outages from unnecessary patches in the power industry than I've seen from hackers. I mean,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
self denial of service. Nice word.
Yeah. To Zach's expertise, I always tell people that they can't have security by design without having maturity by design. So you really have to keep those up to date. Yeah.
I agree. Danielle, how do you think cloud adoption is going to impact the future of security, especially as it pertains to this industrial control systems environments?
Yeah, I'm really glad that Eric made the point about what are we talking about when we talk about AI, because we have the exact same problem when we talk about the cloud, and we had the same problem when we were talking about cyber, right? It became a catch-all. And a lot of the ICS end users, I have to go in and kind of tell them, this is cloud computing, this is cloud storage, and this is a cloud application. And the configuration that is right for you, don't let the vendor again figure that out for you. You need to do your own investigation. So, we're seeing a lot of adoption of cloud technologies, especially in oil and gas. I think it'll be interesting to see how the major cloud providers and the third-party applications, the plug and play, actually interact with the development of OEM cloud functionality. So you're seeing a lot of the suppliers and providers building their own operating systems and having new people come in and develop applications on top. Is that running on Microsoft? Is it not? And what is the interplay between that kind of trifecta of the developers? And so we see oil and gas, really kind of ahead of the curve, I think, on adopting cloud technologies. But then we know that the utility side of the house for ICS is a little bit more advanced on cybersecurity. And so I think we'll see some new guidance back to the standards kind of question on how we help owners and operators kind of roll out connectivity. But the problem still kind of, I think, for cloud adoption lies in trust for third-party ownership and access to their data. And I think somebody else mentioned, there's a lot of data. It's a data rich environment, no matter what, in an ICS world, but it's information poor. And like I said at the outset, when you choose to automate something, you need to make sure that your data is even digital, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that exists in Excel spreadsheets, and that's not digital data, that's stagnant, static data. And so we need to be able to put that all together. So I think we'll see a wholesale change to the way that the industries kind of purchase and spend operationally. And, they kind of acquire more subscription-based models and hybrid cloud architectures, but I don't know if we'll see like more standardization across different parts of the business that actually see kind of the whole scale applicability of the cloud yet. So I think there are definitely some pain points over the next 10 years we're gonna have to sift through.
Absolutely. I think we're living through some of those pain points today. Now that we're in the cloud, Alan, I wanted to ask you, how do you design a cloud-based PKI for IoT devices and use cases? And what would be the difference between a cloud-based PKI for IoT devices and enterprise PKI?
Sure. Yeah, so PKI is one specific solution that people use, again, in the enterprise as well as in IoT applications to secure connections between things. So we were just talking about data and extreme amounts of data that are coming from these industrial assets or coming from a medical device that's attached to a person. And then that data is going somewhere, whether it's through an iPhone or a tablet, and then it's going over the internet, right? Or cellular. So we have to be able to trust the data that's coming from all of these things such that then we can believe the insights that we're getting from them, and that it's, when we analyze that on the back end. So again, PKI is one framework that we can use to help create a solid root of trust that is established between all of these endpoints that need to talk to each other. So I think from my view of the world, we are seeing more customers implementing certificate-based authentication. And so that's a unique device identity that allows individual endpoints to have a characteristic, again, a certificate or a key that is unique to it. And so I think when we step back and take a look at how can then AI tie into that, it's really if we're using AI to kind of detect anomalies and we find a device or an endpoint or an application that is acting irregularly, then if we have a way to kind of shut off communication to that device and then update that with a refreshed validation or refreshed identity, then your operations can continue. And so leveraging the cloud and being able to remotely address this problem when it comes to authentication is something that I think we are going to see more and more of, and we're talking to many people about how to do that, because we're running global operations. We've got factories in different parts of the world with different capabilities to connect. We have to be able to keep our operations running and our businesses running. So I think that there's a lot more that we can go into, but that's kind of my perspective at a high level of how that all kind of connects.
I am interested in how you would handle devices that aren't connected 24/7 or don't necessarily have the compute power for traditional PKI.
Yes, there's a lot of different options for that. That's part of what our architects help customers do, but it's really understanding what at a base level can you place in your device in terms of encryption. Can you use some sort of key that, again, can be unique, that is not pre-shared, that is not known to everybody, and that you can then have control over and have a overall life cycle for, because we know that these devices that we're making are probably going to last 10, 15, 20 years or more. Our customers expect them to be kept up to date, so we have to have a way to connect to them remotely. So there's ways to do that by enabling the device itself to be able to do key generation, store keys in private places in hardware, and then be able to connect to it via a cloud service or a cloud management tool. So I think there's multiple different ways to architect that. I think it's important to kind of to understand, what is the service level that you deliver to your customer, and then kind of work backwards to figure out the tools that need to support that.
That's helpful for sure. I'm going to start digging back into these questions in the Q&A. Keep them coming, guys. A lot of them seem to be, I've been scanning them. Some of them are a little similar. I'm going to, again, open this up to whoever wants to answer it first. It can be as many of you as you'd like. Kevin ORR asks, what are the risks of AI machine learning detraining them to be used for the opposite of what they were designed for? Are there any safety systems for this technology? And how would we know that they have been compromised?
I think the security in AI is a large topic, and there are a lot of people trying to tackle this from the academia or from the industrial or from the industrial world. The risk to AI is in, so we can maybe see two elements into it. So the risk that the data is compromised or tampered with, and that basically you are learning from a wrong data, right? So if we take the example that you are trying to learn from a plant or from an OT space to detect, like from behavior analysis perspective, but if you learn and if you learn and the data you get there are already compromised, then you are learning wrong, right? So your behavior, your normal behavior, is really a behavior that's already under attack. Right? So you will not be able to detect in the future if there is an attack going on that was already done during the learning phase. So there is a problem with the data itself and its integrity, right? And make sure that we are injecting the right data to the AI engines. The other one is how to compromise the learning engines themselves. And this comes really to normal software security principles, where you want to make sure that the engines are running with integrity in place. Now, how to determine, right, that if this is a wrong, if it's learning wrong or providing you with the wrong insights, I think this is an area where we or the industry or maybe people here in the panel, our friends, maybe they have more insights, but without the human intervention there, it's going to be really difficult to make that visible.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think that, especially as I look through a lot of these Q&A questions, a lot of them are asking that same general question of security as it pertains to AI in certain situations. And I think that a lot of these questions can also be their own panel of just, what ifs. Like, for example, another one is any piece of hardware or any piece of software can be hijacked. So why should AI outputs be any different? What will happen if the AI decision tree itself can go bad, right? And I think that that's a much larger conversation in cybersecurity as well. I'm not sure if you guys want to try tackling that one as well.
Well, I mean, I think Zach nailed it. And so did your questioner. You know, you could ask the same question in my previous field, firewalls. You know, firewalls run software, software can hack. Why not your firewall? But it goes back to what Zach was also talking about building proper threat models, understanding like what are your failure modes. So your AI needs to go through the same sort of process of what could go wrong, what possible threats does your AI model could it undergo, and then what are you going to do to catch it? And for right now, probably the best thing people can be doing is taking that AI output and then running it through a real human being, you know, so that you really got a different sort of an out of band way of testing your AI. We see that being done quite a bit. You know, it's not just run AI, go to sleep, come back next week. It's really sit on top of it and watch it. But the idea is that it's going to really help you focus on what matters.
I would also add that you can game pretty much any system, but when we think about cybersecurity, we talk about logs all the time. And there's a really good, byproduct of a lot of AI, and that's that we have a lot of good data. And so I think we'll also start to see more automation entered into cybersecurity, which, for smaller organizations, you can save time and talent, like by what Eric just said, is having security analysts, review and spend their time on data that is necessary for security, but they don't have to go and hunt it down. They don't have to kind of create that data from scratch and monitor it themselves. They can actually pull it out of AI systems to then review it for human interaction and intervention. So.
And to Zach's point too about the things that can go wrong, if anybody wants a little fun, go Google adversarial AI and the word guacamole, and it's really interesting examples of how by tampering with images you can have AI completely misinterpret what it's looking at. So that's just a little fun homework assignment for everybody. Adversarial AI and guacamole, and see what you get.
I'll have to check that out. We're definitely in in what I consider to be the infancy of AI. We're not even close to where it's going to be. Another question that's less grounded in AI that Vishal put into the chat was, there is a more fundamental hesitance when it comes to using cloud-based technologies for ICS. While security is a significant concern, a more common misconception is that it seems to be that all my data is going to be on Google for everyone else to see. Do you guys have any ideas on how this is being addressed today, or any kind of perspectives on that?
Yeah, like I mentioned about the definition issue, it's like you need to explain to every end user and owner and operator, what type of configuration for any cloud technology is best for them. So a lot of the times they assume that there's security by design, or that there's data security, or there's things like that. But that's not the case. And so, I mean, you can actually have a really robust security program, adopt some type of cloud connectivity, and then we all kind of know the risks associated with different API security issues. And it might not be yours, but there could be an API on your cloud that's not secure. Your data could be misconfigured, the way that it's stored. So, just having Google access to all of my data, with their other customers, I don't think that's really the concern. I think the concern is there's this assumption that it's all kind of taken care of because I've bought into that platform. And that's not really the case. And so I think there needs to be just another level of investigation, like I said, with like asking the right questions about where your data is being stored, how long it's being stored, why it's being stored, and not just saying, here's a check, this is the end goal. You have to be involved in that conversation, and you have to, back to that word dynamic, it's not a one-time decision or a one-time check-in.
Absolutely. And then another one just came in kind of out of left field. I'm not sure what everyone's involvement in is blockchain, but Edwin says, I would like to think that ICS networks should be looking into blockchain solutions for many of these issues. Are you familiar with any projects looking to address these issues using blockchain technologies? And as a buffer, while you guys are thinking about that, I do know IBM is working on several blockchain technologies for that exact reason. I am by no means an expert on it, but I know that if you look up IBM blockchain, that's literally what it's all about. Listen to a couple talks from a couple people from there. I believe Hitachi Vantara is actually working on something in that realm as well. So I think that's where I would start. I don't know if anyone else has any other knowledge on blockchain as it pertains to ICS networks.
Okay, go ahead, Danielle.
I just know that food production, that's the only one that really comes to mind with like chain of custody. And actually IBM has a food trust program that they're trying to initiate on blockchain. And then the other one I would say is DER technologies across the energy industry. There are a couple pilot projects for blockchain that might connect, new transactions across a utility infrastructure. But again, the utility has jurisdiction over their infrastructure, but then you're having kind of a plug and play approach with customers, and there's no good way to secure what's out of your jurisdiction. And so there's a couple pilot projects, even NREL has one for blockchain, but I haven't seen like the efficacy of the pilot yet. So I think there's some potential out there, but I wouldn't like put my stock in it yet.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo that a little bit, Daniel. I think before jumping into a blockchain project, I think understanding maybe complexities and trade-offs that blockchain has perhaps. I don't think it's very simple or fast. So if you think about all the transactions that need to occur and the signing and all of that, it's that quote like complexity is the enemy of security, right? And so we want to make sure that it's somewhat simple and secure enough. So I think that's something to think about, compute power and that sort of thing, when you're likely going to need to be securing a bunch of different endpoints. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
I can talk about in the supply chain market, there's actually some good use cases for blockchain, but they're still in their infancy. The one that comes to mind is one that comes out of Unisys called Digital Bill of Materials that Chris Blask is leading. But again, it's in the prototype stage, but it's a pretty good use of blockchain to basically use the blockchain technology to manage the handoffs of information through a supply chain when you're handing off materials from supplier to supplier to supplier. So some good promise there, but it's still in its infancy, and for all the reasons that Ellen and Daniel just pointed out.
And I'll add to this. So the question was on, can we replace, or the OT network should move to blockchain? So blockchain is a great technology, but are we trying to find a problem for the technology, right? So a problem for a solution. When it comes to the OT networks, there are some constraints, there are some requirements. Performance is one. The exactitude of the outcomes is one. So if you bring the blockchain constraints, as Ellen mentioned, it doesn't work. It will not work for the constraints of the OT environments today when we talk about the system or inside the system. And there are, so if you're looking for the security, secure communications, there are other mechanisms that are simpler and less complex to achieve the same objective. Now, what I see really blockchain bringing a high value here is in building that trust relationship between the different actors in the OT space. When it comes to the providers, and if we talk about the bill of material, Unisys, I'm pretty familiar with their project. Or if you take, for example, the Brooklyn project, where they had an energy transaction between the buildings using the blockchain. So this creates, because that's the core of the blockchain, so you have a distributed trust mechanism. And if we take our landscape today, it's a distributed responsibility in the OT space from the day we start producing the products, and then even when it comes to the end users, the asset owners. So blockchain can be used as a promising mechanism to ensure that trust relationship between these actors.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Zach said was nailed it. There's a key word that Zach used there, the word distributed. If you're running this all on your plant floor, I can't think of a good reason to use blockchain. But if you've got a distributed environment where you're working across companies or across buildings or across things, distributed, then maybe blockchain's for you. But it's still all in its infancy, I think.
Absolutely, and I would even piggyback off of that. And a lot of the things that makes blockchain so good are not what you want in IT, right? You don't necessarily want something to be immutable or transparent. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it that don't necessarily match, especially when you look at like regulations. And I've also seen a lot of people try to meet blockchain in terms of could this be a database or can we use blockchain for this? So. But definitely, go on.
Yeah, I think there is an interesting project that if people want to get familiar on the constraint, there is a lot of research behind. It's called the IOTA project. It comes out of MIT. And it's really interesting in the mechanisms on how to tune the blockchain to meet the constraints of the IoT space, right? So, so maybe as a second assignment, you can go take a look to the IOTA and understand how blockchain can be used in a distributed environment like the IoT environment.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone indulging the blockchain question. Danielle, what is the role of segmentation in security ICS, and how do you think it can be enhanced?
Yeah, so everyone who knows me knows that I'm a segmentation fanatic. I think segmentation is essential. I don't think it's an option. I think when we talk about cloud adoption, it's even more essential in how you build your configuration and why. And again, back to those, decisions you make over data storage and where it is and for what reason and for how long. And what people assume is that there's a one size fits all way to enable network segmentation, but there's actually a lot of creative different ways to do it. You can do network segmentation based on some networks, but you can also do it based on user privilege and credentials. You can do physical segmentation. You can do some of the hybrid cloud segmentation, and you can do rules-based segmentation, which can be bolstered by like hardware gateways, data diodes, and software-defined networking technology. I know that that's kind of just throwing a lot of buzzwords out there, but those are some of the new innovations that I think in the OT space are really, really interesting and might be really critical going forward. So I would always say, never just think of segmentation as a buzzword that is a one size fits all kind of network segmentation based on subnetworks. If you really want to, if you're resource strapped and you want to get creative about it, there's a lot of ways to do it really well. That again, reduces your residual risk and helps you out with your compliance mechanisms and all of those things. So it adds a lot of value.
Yeah,
If I
and
may,
so go on.
If I might add something to what Danielle, I think Danielle nailed it well. And and there is one word I want to follow on, is the software-defined networks. Actually, we see the software-defined everything emerging in our future or current generation systems or the future generation systems, and of course the traditional way of doing segmentation has to change, because now we are dealing with a different different mechanisms, different technology, and concepts like the zero trust, can be, and the NIST is pushing this at the network level, but it can also be taken to the product level, where you can bring zero trust based designs or zero trust based architectures to ensure, or as a new way of doing segmentation.
Yeah, and just for anyone who's not familiar with software-defined networking, it's basically a rules-based configuration that handles data in transit, where it can go and what types of data can be communicated on a path. So you can basically set that rule up in your network to direct traffic, like a traffic guard, and you can do that on hardware as well. There's a lot of really good vendors out there that are pushing this, and a lot of R&D in that space. I don't want to, give any names and promote any industries, but it's definitely something to look into.
Yeah, for any of you guys out there, as an old firewall guy, I like to think of it as firewalls everywhere, 100%. It's really the extension of between running that firewall to separate boundaries to running those rule sets on what Danielle just said, on everything. So just because two computers are sitting side by side doesn't mean they need to talk to each other. So what's the rule set to manage what they can do?
Yeah, talk to each other or speak the same language, right? Different protocols. So
yeah.
And I did see Alex Rhodes had a pretty interesting question in the live chat, which was, how do the rewards of adopting cloud-based technologies into critical infrastructure outweigh the risks of introducing another layer of vulnerabilities? I know this touches on the complexity comment, but I don't know if anyone had any answers to that, or if anyone here has had to sell somebody on adopting cloud.
I think the adoption of cloud is, so when we talk about cloud, as Danielle mentioned, so it's different types of configurations of cloud. And I think the concept of cloud computing itself is great. So it's now brought down to the system level, what we call the fog or the mist, right? So it brings a high value right now. And so it brings a high value from an operational perspective. So the users of this technology will get maybe their plants running better or faster, or they get a better ROI. Now, it's a technology as any other technology. So it's the same thing happened with IP. When we brought IP to the old control systems or to the old OT systems, we know what's the benefit of having IT, open systems. You can do segmentation, you can direct your traffic and all. So when it comes to cloud, it's just another technology. So you need to take it into account when you do your secure by design, or when you build your security strategy for your operating environment. Yes, it brings constraints, but that's true for every single thing, every single technology we bring to the game. So we can think of cloud as a technological extension of what we have today to have a better value. And security will need to be taken from day zero when we start thinking of how to bring that technology into our needs.
One of the things that I actually think cloud can reduce our security risks too. And I'll give you a very specific example. Back when I was a young engineer, we were introducing computers. We were responsible for putting in the bare metal. Then we're overlaying a BIOS on top of that. Then we're overlaying an operating system. Then we're overlaying multiple applications. We had an attack surface as wide as New York City. And I remember my first startup, we had these rack rooms full of metal running with lots of opportunities for attack. And then VMs came out. Hey, go VMs, go. And all of a sudden, there's less metal, less BIOSes, less operating system. Yes, we have a hypervisor that if it breaks, you got a problem. But your attack surfaces start to reduce. And now, you don't even have to know what your operating system is. It's not your problem if you want to run, say, a serverless instance out in the cloud. You can have an attack surface that's absolutely, if you're using a tool like a Lambda, or I think it's Fusion on the other platforms, but you can have an application that is absolutely tiny and does not have an operating system that's exposed underneath it. So you can actually reduce your attack surface and your vulnerability by going to the cloud. Now there's other issues, okay? You got to transfer the stuff up into the cloud. You're not running it, but it's not a black and white thing that the cloud is riskier than bare metal. It's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I've sold enterprise storage and the need's never gone away. It's just the customers changed dramatically.
If I could add really quickly, I actually think I said this on a past IIoT panel that I was on. I think we are just scratching the surface on cloud applications and business models that go with that. And so I think a lot of people have thought that, these are maybe the 5 options you have for business models with cloud applications and technology. And I think that that's really short-sighted. So that value is just kind of exploding. And that's what the business need is, right? Is to keep customers engaged, to offer new rollouts, to be able to pay for subscription models, all the things that the cloud becomes really advantageous for. But I don't think we've seen even a small fraction of the types of business models it's going to enable in the future. And then I think on the risk side, we also haven't seen the potential for it to be a single point of failure across, maybe one vertical or across an industry, if it comes down to that as a security vulnerability. So that's the trade-off as I see it, to not be short-sighted about it.
Yeah, and I did have a question that I wanted to ask everyone or anyone that wanted to jump in, but how can you ensure that your product roadmap includes IoT cybersecurity as a differentiator? I find that a lot of companies have this problem as they're trying to plan out their technical roadmap to their executive teams. I'm not sure if you guys had any input on that.
Yeah, I can speak first on that. I think that first of all, going from a non-connected solution to then adding connectivity into it is already adding value for your solution to customers, because you're giving them more visibility. There's optimization of the asset and how it's running. There's predictive maintenance. There's all these benefits. I think then on top of that, if you are able to then ensure your customers that you're doing that with the best kind of cybersecurity practices in place, that you've embedded that into your devices, you've embedded that into your applications, and you've embedded that into the cloud, your cloud service. I think that is kind of saying that you're going above and beyond just connecting things. And so I think it kind of also just feeds into the whole digital transformation buzzword, of you're then again enabling your customers to help have new business models and to grow their revenue. So I definitely see using cybersecurity as a way to differentiate your products, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. Everything that we've been talking about today, systems that run our government, run our utilities, and all of that. We don't want to mess around when it comes to those, because it can impact a large portion of people and the economy.
I'm going to say that we've been through this before, and we'll continue to go through this. Security is like reliability. And if you're making a product, you can decide whether you're going to have the more expensive product that is super reliable, or you're going to have the cheap product that isn't that reliable, and each is going to have a marketplace. That's really going to be a decision. But you can't be you can't go out and say, hey, we're going to be we're going to advertise that we're super secure when we're not. And I've seen companies that have done a very, very good job of taking security seriously, and their customers who care about security buy accordingly. And Zach's company is actually a pretty good example of this. The type of things that I've watched Schneider do over the last decade to really address security. I feel quite comfortable going to a client and saying, hey, go talk to Schneider. They care, and if you care, then you should be talking to somebody like that. So we've done it with safety, we've done it with reliability, we've done it with all sorts of things. This is rinse and repeat, in my opinion.
I think so I'm talking here to people who are they creating products, and they want to make sure security is a differentiator. So when you look into what's the differentiator from a customer perspective, they want something to solve the present problem or the future problem. So if you can bring a solution or security, bring something in your product that will solve that present and future problem, that's a value. And of course, they will see the value, right? And then when you get that agreement from the customer, it's just a matter how you plan to get to implement that feature, those features, or those mechanisms to provide the value. So I think you should always look into what's the value behind cybersecurity, and the value is always tied to what problem is the customer trying to solve. What's the pain point of the customer there, right? And once we understand what's the pain point, the differentiator of story becomes very easy, because it's same for everything you do in your product: safety, liability, even performance, right? When you talk about product features or capabilities.
Hey, and I'll add one other thing. Hey, you guys out there who are asset owners who are buying gear, you get what you ask for. And if you don't ask for security, you're not going to get. When I was CTO at Belden, one of the things that brought tears to my eyes was a lack of customer input on security. And then it was really hard for me to drive security as a message to the management team. They'd say, oh, well, none of our customers really care about security on those switches, so why are we spending $100,000? Absolutely, the marketplace, the buyers have to get that message across to the market. If you don't, you'll get what you ask for.
I didn't want to go against the grain here, but I was thinking the same thing. Like, I haven't seen the demand signal actually on the customer side. I did a report on smart cities, and it is a terrifying avenue to explore, just because, the big vendors and the Schneiders of the world, they're doing a great job, and they have, an area where you can go do a vulnerability disclosure, but there's so many IoT startups that at the end of the day would like to be kind of acquired and let whoever acquires them deal with the security aspect, that they're going to offer a better price point, not build in security because the customer doesn't know what they're asking for, doesn't care. You'll see this in like building automation a lot of the times. And then they'll go and they'll deploy that system maybe underground in a meter system, and then not change the hardware passwords. And it's going to create, especially with the encryption feature that Ellen could probably talk about for, another panel. That's kind of my biggest fear, is that, then the encryption will become completely unreliable, and we'll already have so many different systems kind of deployed because we have a capitalist market where we have all of these different entrants, but there's just not enough demand signaling, which will increase the cost of the product. So then you actually drive more business potentially to the smaller groups and providers. So that's my negative attention for the day.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's even the small ones. I just finished working on a tier 2 RTU provider that just has a security that just brought tears to my eyes because the customers aren't asking for it. you know, and it wasn't
Yep.
a small company. It's a name brand company.
It's tough sometimes, you know. And with that, you know, I have to say this has been a fantastic panel. We're right up against the time. I feel like we can talk for another hour. I know there's been a lot of activity in the Q&A. I copied some of the questions down, so I'll make sure that somebody tries to get those answered for you, or at least we'll all have access to that. And like I said, I really appreciate everyone for your time today, everyone watching and everyone presenting with me. Thank you.